Good morning. We'd like to welcome you to the BlackUSA.News morning show. Neil Dubois, how are you, Neil?
Good morning, Donnie. Thanks for having me. I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. We're being joined by Doug Gansler. He's running for governor. Good morning. What do I call you?
Look, I've been called everything. So you call me, Doug works. That's about as good as I can expect on this morning. Thanks for having me, Donnie. I appreciate it. And good to see you, Neil, as well.
Always a pleasure, Doug.
So tell us about it. Why are you running for governor?
I did 23 years in government, and I was a federal prosecutor. I was a state's attorney for 8 years. I was the attorney general for 8 years and was president of all the attorneys general in the country. And then in the private sector was doing, I've been doing some really fun, good things, interesting things. Number of boards, been on the, I started the Charm City Youth Lacrosse up there in Baltimore City about 12 years ago. Been doing a lot with that. Year Up, I'm on the board there. College Track on the board there. But, it wasn't really enough. I really enjoy, my currency is helping people. And when I had time to reflect like we all did during COVID, I was like, man, what am I doing? I like helping people. And then I saw that and a lot of people were not enamored with the person that was the perceived front runner in this race. So a lot of people asked me to run. And it was interesting. The same folks that were against me last time were all with me this time because they thought the prospect of him winning was not a good thing for the party. So talked to a lot of folks and decided it was the right thing to do. I'm the only person in the race with a record of progressive and practical accomplishment with the experience to win. And also from a campaign perspective, we need to make sure we beat the Republicans. Baltimore needs me to win the primary so we can beat the Republicans and have a Democratic governor. Donnie, you're on mute.
We're going to have to take over a show.
Oh, there he is.
Take over, Neil.
Take over. So I got to tell you, just to kind of layer on top of what Doug just said, I've known him for a long time. I don't know if he remembers, but I remember a really, really good friend of mine from all the way back in my law school days ran and won a county council seat in Anne Arundel County. And about, every bit of 15 years ago, he said, hey, I'm going door to door in Odenton this weekend. Do you want to come out and knock on doors with me? And I said, sure. And I showed up. It was a hot Saturday. And he said, Neil, I want you to meet my friend Doug, who was running for AG at the time. And we went door to door on a random Saturday, the three of us, just knocking on doors. That was the first time I had met Doug. And ever since, they made a huge impression on me that day because it's very rare in people running for statewide office for people to go door to door. It's a lost art. And this idea that people really, too many politicians, I think, say they like people, but don't really like people. And it's very rare to find politicians who you kind of have to drag away from interacting with people because they almost enjoy it too much. And Doug's very much a people person, has been ever since I knew him. Was a privilege for me to help him in that campaign. And when he ran for governor in 2014, it was also a privilege for me I think it was 2013 when you were running, to be part of the Young Professionals organization that assisted his campaign. And Doug and I have stayed in touch since then while he's been in private practice. And when I heard that he was throwing his hat in the ring, I immediately reached out to him in his campaign and said, how can I help?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I do like going door to door. I mean, there's, a lot of these, and I'm in a race. Look, I'm in a race with 9 people right now. 2 of them are multi-millionaires. A bunch of them are fundraisers for profession. So they're all raising a lot of money and they're going to, do all the airwaves. But I think it's the ground game and meeting people, talking to people. Last night I was in Queen Anne's County, for example, with the Democratic Club there and talking to people about issues that they have. And you really, that's where you learn what the problems are. The problems don't come from the top down. They come from the people up. And to hear what's on people's minds and what they want to see out of their next governor, I think is critical. And so no more important than in Baltimore City in particular.
What separates you from the field?
Sorry, Donnie?
What separates you from the field?
Oh, so I think a number of things. I think of having that record, having actually led, I mean, of the 9 people, the majority of them have never run for any, most of them aren't really from Maryland. Most of them haven't done a lot in Maryland. And most of them have not run for dog catcher, much less governor. They were shaving one morning and saw a governor in the mirror and thought, hey, that'd be a great starter job. Let's go do that. And so I think that when I go around the state, I hear people really want somebody who has led in a time of crisis. And we are in a time of crisis. We're talking to each other on a laptop and instead of live when I was, which I appreciate being with you. And so, there's a lot of crises that are hitting us right now. One of them is COVID, coming out of COVID. How are we going to rebuild the economy? How are we going to rebuild small businesses? How are we going to rebuild Baltimore? And, I led during a crisis. I was the head of all the attorneys general in the United States during the national mortgage foreclosure crisis and got almost $2 billion into Maryland to help people stay in their homes. I took on the big banks and kept hundreds of thousands of people from being evicted. Another crisis that we have is climate change. And, I cleaned up the Chesapeake Bay. I was the attorney general for the environment. And we have that going forward. We have environmental justice issues in Baltimore City with the incinerator. We need solar energy. We need wind energy. We need to convert the 2 billion pounds of chicken manure that goes in the Chesapeake Bay into a power source. We need to set up the infrastructure of electric vehicles that are coming. We need to prevent sprawl. Another crisis that I led through was the Beltway snipers. I've been that was a time of great crisis, and we have another crisis right now in criminal justice and criminal justice reform. And I've been a prosecutor for many, many, many years. I'm the only person in the race on either side that has any experience whatsoever in criminal justice. I'm the only one that knows the difference between an indictment and a conviction. And so, I started back working on criminal justice reform issues in 1989 when I was president of the NAACP Criminal Justice Committee in Montgomery County. I started working on diversity issues then. When I became state's attorney, we took every time a police officer shot his or her gun, we put it in the grand jury. Let the people of the community decide whether that was justified shooting or not. We started the first fully implemented community prosecution in the nation, where we had prosecutors working with community police to try and build that trust between the community and law enforcement. We started the first domestic violence dockets, and we're going to have one of those in every courtroom in Maryland going forward. If you don't have a domestic violence docket in your state's attorney's office, you won't be funded by the state. And very relevant and importantly, we've had drug courts. And I was the first candidate for governor to come out to legalize cannabis. I think we ought to be expunging people's records that have been prosecuted for possession of cannabis. And it's disproportionately used against people of color. And drug courts were something I was starting in the county. I'd done it as a federal prosecutor, and because we locked too many people up, and we ought to give people a chance to get rid of their health problem. Anyway, and the final crisis I'll talk about actually real quickly, which is I led on this issue, and not everybody was for it at the time, on marriage equality. People weren't allowed to marry who they loved, and so I spearheaded that by writing an opinion recognizing out-of-state same-sex marriage. The right-wing Republicans tried to impeach me for it. And we have the same kind of situation now of a social issue on women's reproductive rights. And, people look at what happened in Texas and say, hey, that's Texas. That doesn't affect us. But on December 1st, the Supreme Court is going to hear the Mississippi case. And they don't hear stuff. I mean, the picture right behind me that you're looking at was me arguing in front of the Supreme Court where I won 9-0 on a child sexual abuse case. I understand how they work. They're not taking this case because they don't want to scale back Roe v. Wade or even overturn it, which makes it much more important for us to have a Democratic governor going forward. You're muted again. Man.
You think you would figure that out by now?
Neil, do you have any questions?
Questions, no, but I want to add a comment to that. There's a great expression that I love from the French Revolution, which is, tell me where the people are going so that I may lead them, which is sort of this fancy politician's way of saying, I'm going to put my finger in the air, see which way the winds are going. And then instead of actually stepping up and leading and being on the forefront, I'll just figure out, what the people want. And then I'll pretend that I adopted their position. And we see way too much of that in society today. And, Doug just went through a litany of his credentials and his experience. But the one thing that's really at the forefront of all of it that I think he underplayed a little bit, so let me sell it for him, is the fact that he was out in front on a lot of these issues before they were necessarily popular. That's leadership, right? That's not somebody stepping in and saying, "Oh, the people are already headed in this direction. Let me just kind of piggyback behind them and pretend that I'm leading them." And I'll add one to that he didn't even mention. And Doug, correct me if I'm wrong about this, because you would remember better than I would. But President Obama was obviously an immensely popular two-term president. But people forget, you go back to 2007, he was a first-term Democratic senator running against Hillary Clinton, who was considered to be absolutely inevitable as the Democratic nominee. And Doug was one of the first people first elected officials in the country, really, to step forward and support and endorse then Senator Obama at a time when Hillary Clinton was just gaining an immense number of endorsements. And again, Doug, correct me if I'm wrong, but my recollection is that you and Elijah Cummings were co-chairs of the Obama campaign in the state of Maryland. And that was before President Obama really took over that campaign and ultimately won the nomination. So again, Doug demonstrates true leadership, even when it's sometimes unpopular. And that to me is something that we don't see very much of in today's political discourse.
No, thanks, Neil. I mean, we did. I got slammed for that. The establishment was all with Hillary. I remember Elijah Cummings and I showed up at one of these restaurant things to have a meeting, and we thought it was supposed to start at like 8:00, and it's 8:05. We're still the only ones standing there. Like, I think it's just going to be us. I mean, it's hard to remember back then that how we really took that from the beginning, and it was my privilege and honor to do that and work on that campaign. And we did a lot as a result of that. We started the first civil rights department in Maryland's history, and the president and his people were helpful on all these things. So it was a great time, and talk about getting in front of people. Another story that one of the areas that I'm very I'm passionate about is returning citizens and reentry and back from folks that are locked up. And you may remember this from the campaign. Donnie, you and I talked about this at the time, that I wanted to give people in prison laptops a year or two out so that they could, sanitize, obviously, against pornography and all that, but a laptop so they could get a degree in culinary arts or auto mechanics, and then have companies that hire those folks get a tax advantage, so we can actually help people, give them a chance to get back into the community. And the Baltimore Sun wrote an article making fun of me for doing it, and of course now they do it. But just you gotta things that drug take back programs. I mean, things that make sense. People eventually catch up, and so I'm looking forward to this. I think this is a time where we really need leadership. I think if Baltimore will suffocate. Baltimore is having the day I decided to run for governor, make that decision, Donnie, to answer an earlier question. I was sitting in front of Terra Cafe, waiting to go in and have lunch in Baltimore City, and I was on a call, finishing up a call, and I was watching these people just wander around. This is in the middle of COVID, like sort of aimlessly looking hopeless, no jobs and businesses closing down, and thinking, DC has had a renaissance. Philadelphia's had a renaissance. Baltimore has more promise than those two cities and most cities in America, yet it hasn't reached that. And as governor, can I fix that? Absolutely not. Can I work my butt off to try and fix it and work with the local stakeholders on issues like accessibility, an opportunity to criminal justice, education, public health, jobs? I think that's in criminal justice reform. I think those are things I can't wait to do, and I'm excited about it. And and Baltimore needs it, because it's right now it's not, the Republicans just don't seem to care about what's going on in Baltimore City. And I'm talking to folks that are lawyers, downtown lawyers, that say my clients can't come downtown for lunch anymore because they're worried about the crime. I mean, this is outrageous, and we need to turn that tide.
There's a lot to unpack there. Neil, you had mentioned Barack Obama. Is that to suggest that because I'm Black that I like Barack Obama? Because the question we've had in the community was, what did it mean for the Black community?
No, actually,
so
it didn't mean.
let me go to Mr. Gansler. What did Obama? What did he mean to the Black community? Because
I think Donnie, I think the most important thing he meant to the Black community was that every young Black child in America, 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, realized that anything is possible. I think that's if you look at sort of I know what you're getting at, which is the policy issues and how did that sort of turn the tide and better the African American community in the United States, and people can determine that either way and make the arguments that he could have done more or that he did a lot and sort of within the confines that he was at. But I think a couple things. I think one, for those children, for the aspirations to realize you can be anything. If Barack Hussein Obama became president of the United States, anything's possible for an African American young boy or girl. A. B. He started a conversation that had been under the rocks for 400 years. He didn't finish the conversation, I agree, but he certainly started a conversation that morphed into things like Black Lives Matter and some of the conversations that we're having right now around the country as to race. It's a complicated issue. There's no right answer, but I think he helped promote that dialogue. I mean, look right here in Maryland. We have an African-American Speaker of the House. We're about to have an African-American treasurer, one of the three most biggest jobs on the Board of Public Works. We're likely, Brian Frost announced today he's not running for Attorney General. We're likely to have a Black Attorney General. We have an enormous amount of people in our General Assembly that are African American. I think the highest percentage outside, maybe the highest percentage in the country, but certainly outside the South. I mean, there's opportunity there, and so people can be critical, and the other thing about it is he was, and I'm obviously biased, but he was one of the best presidents we've had if not the best president we've had in my lifetime in terms of what happened in the country during his tenure and all the great things that occurred. And I think that is important also. There's a lot of many white Americans have not had an African American as their boss. When Eric Holder was my boss when I was a federal prosecutor, and it was something I was honored to have and proud to have. Every American had as their boss, as the president of the United States, an African American. And the white supremacists, those guys that came out from under the rocks and sort of crawling up the Capitol on January 6th, I'm sure they weren't very happy about it, but it set an example for the rest of the country and the African American community around the country.
Yeah, so Donnie, to answer your question that you sort of directed to me, we touched on this.
Well, Neil, I want to slow you down. We're interviewing Doug Gansler for governor, so I needed you to help pose some questions to him.
Oh, you want me to ask Doug questions? He's answering all your questions.
Well, he doesn't need a translator. I thought you were going to pull something out of him that maybe me and my non-legal mind didn't know, but proceed.
All right. Okay, fair enough. Doug, here's a question for you. How is Doug Gansler in 2021 different than the Doug Gansler in 2013 who ran the first time for governor?
First, I think one thing is I'm older, more reflective. I mean, look, I won elections for 16 years. I was, I was the youngest state's attorney in Montgomery County, and when I won that race and got reelected for a second term, then I ran for Attorney General as the first person statewide to win an office for Montgomery County since 1819 or something, and we weren't supposed to win. I ran against incumbencies in both races, and this is my fourth time running, and losing the governor's race in 2014 was like having a ice bucket dumped over my head. I knew that I could, that I was the more qualified person running. I knew that I'd do a better job as governor. As I think, I can't remember who it was, Winston Churchill. Somebody said the voters have spoken, those bastards. We lost that race, and it was humbling and it was eye-opening, and I thought I was not going to get back into public service after doing 23 years, but I have a calling for it. It's what makes me tick, and so could I take every 5 minutes of that race and dissect it? Yes. Did I have the establishment against me that race? Yes. The establishment does not like the the perceived front runner right now because he's does things like go to the Maryland Democratic State Party dinner and talks about his long lost brother Larry Hogan, and so I think so. I think it's a different race at a different time. I think the urgency is different. I think I literally everywhere I go, people say we need somebody who has led before. This is someone who's ready on day one, who has bold visions and the ability to do it. Not because the rhetoric is good. Donnie's gonna have a lot better speakers on this show than me, and they're going to be better looking, and they're going to be all of that. But when it comes down to it, in a time of crisis, people don't want to experiment. We experiment with Donald Trump. We've had other experiments that haven't worked so well. So I think that's one of the things. And the second thing, I was biking through Baltimore City, ran into a couple of guys at a coffee shop, and they said, oh man, you're Doug Gansler, you're running for governor, yeah. So, we were just talking about you last night at our dinner parties, and we said, if you don't win the primary, we're not going to win the general election. And I think that's also a different now. People realize that, yes, we're a Democratic state, but yes, we lose governor's races. We've lost 3 of the last 5. And we've lost the last 2 with Ben Jealous and Anthony Brown in huge Democratic years. Democratic years around the country where someone named Stuart Pittman, who no one had heard of, won, county executive in Anne Arundel County, Calvin Ball won in Howard County. We are on the threshold of a massive Republican year, not only because of American history dictates that when the party out of power is going to have a bad year and going to have a good year, and the party in power is going to have a bad year. Now, we have the presidency, the Senate, and the House. 77 million people last year walked in and voted for mentally ill, narcissistic, dictator wannabe Donald Trump. 77 million. Right now, we're seeing in Virginia a race between somebody who was, by all measures, a competent person who did a great job as governor against a guy who nobody's heard of. And the Republican is going to be either close, the Republican's going to actually win. So fast forward to next year in Maryland, we're going to have a big Republican year, and they have a very, very strong candidate. And so it's going to be, I think people want to win. We talked about the President Obama's race, talked about Joe Biden's race. There are a lot of people who thought, Elizabeth Warren would be great, Bernie Sanders would be great, Pete Buttigieg would be great. But when it came time to vote, who's the person that could beat Donald Trump? That was Joe Biden. And you could quibble about whether he's doing a good job or a bad job now, but that was the person that could remove Donald Trump and the stain that he placed upon the presidency.
So picking up on that, Donnie, I got one more question for Doug, and then I'll let you come back in. Where is the Democratic Party today? Your point about the election of Joe Biden is a valid one, right? There were all sorts of more progressive candidates, and at the end of the day, the primary electorate picked the guy who was, by all accounts, the most moderate and centered and establishment. And now what you see certainly in Washington, D.C. seems to me, in terms of the infrastructure proposal and the reconciliation plan, a much bolder proposal that really is deemed to be more progressive, that is being championed by President Biden. So is the Democratic Party having a little bit of an internal conflict? Where is the Democratic Party today, and where do you stand within that?
Well, it's a big umbrella, as you know, and there's a lot of pieces. And the Maryland Democratic Party doesn't necessarily reflect the National Democratic Party. And one of the things that we have that is not necessarily a national thing is we have a very heavy African-American population and communities of color. I mean, my county, Montgomery County, is the most diverse county perhaps in the country. It's majority minority. And, we have there's a lot of progressives that get elected. There's more moderates. I mean, I'm hard to label in that regard because, I started the first civil rights department in Maryland history. I'm an environmentalist, and, I have the marriage equality issue that I pushed and sort of led the state when no one else was for it. My history and record working on social issues on behalf of people of color. On the other hand, I think jobs are good. I want to build a robust economy and not only provide jobs for people, but to support the small businesses that give those jobs to people, and even bigger businesses that provide jobs on a larger scale. And I think that if you put a bullet in somebody's head, you ought to go to jail. So I've been a prosecutor, a very fair prosecutor, but I've been a prosecutor nonetheless. So it's hard to label me in that Democratic sort of party piece. I like to think that I'm a progressive but rational person. And so I think the party's is working itself out. I mean, yes, there's the sort of the AOC portion of the party loud, and is the dialogue what they're talking about important to hear? Absolutely. Can we incorporate that into our bigger message of helping people? Yes. I mean, look, my view about being a Democrat versus a Republican, unless you're really, really rich, you ought to be a Democrat. And so I sort of live that and follow, I try and help people that need government to help them. The very, very first thing that government does, though, is to keep its people safe. That's its number one mission. And being the only person in the criminal justice world, recognizing that crime is getting out of control, and also recognizing that crime disproportionately affects communities of color and underserved communities, I think makes me uniquely qualified, regardless of where you fit on the political spectrum, to be the governor of Maryland.
Well, 2 times in the past 40-some years, we've had a Republican governor. Black people aren't thinking that way anymore, that you have to be super rich to be a Republican, primarily because in a 9-to-1 Democratic city, we don't have accountability. We've got the worst schools in the state. We've got the highest crime in the state. We've got more vacant houses than anywhere else in the state. It doesn't translate into that on the ground. Your thoughts?
No, you're right. I mean, look, I mentioned Charm City Lacrosse, which obviously isn't, the greatest accomplishment of my life, but I did start it 12 years ago. I recognized that Baltimore City kids did not have access to the Maryland team sport, a sport where, Gilman plays St. Paul's and 35 kids that are in that game are going to go get college scholarship to play lacrosse, and kids from Baltimore City didn't have access to that. So I started it. And one of the things that made me so sad about it, we had hundreds and hundreds of kids would show up at Carroll Park, and then ultimately we went over to Patterson Park as well. And you see these kids, 4, 5, 6, 7 years old. Coach Doug, how you doing? I would go every Saturday morning. I love being with those kids. Coach Doug, how you doing? What's going on? Smart kids, look in the eye, just full of promise. And then they're going off on Monday morning to a school where, if they end up graduating from high school, that means they lived to graduate. They survived all the other, issues that are out there: vacant houses, single family homes, single parent homes, job, lack of sort of vocational access for job training. That not everyone has to go to Harvard. Some people want to actually get a job, and if they do graduate, they can many, a huge percentage of those kids can barely read at a 6th grade level, and then you're trying to figure out why people are shooting each other. And and we need to address those issues. So to your point of accountability, Donnie, I don't know if it's Republican or Democrat. It's just, I do think there is a need to have a governor who cares about the city and has worked in the city, gone to the city, been to the city, and is actually a Marylander that wants to sit down, roll up his or her sleeves, get into a room. This month we're doing affordable housing, and get all the people that work on affordable housing issues in Baltimore City, along with the national folks that have seen what can work in other places, have the mayor and any interested council folks and legislators, the governor, his or herself, and their people in a room, close the door. The only answer we cannot hear is, that's how we've always done it, but everything else is on the table. And do it around housing 1 month, do it around public health 1 month, do it around criminal justice, do it around education, do it around jobs. And again, are we going to fix Baltimore in one term as governor? No. Can we shift the tide? Absolutely. Because the reason why we know it is twofold. One, I've done it. I've tackled these problems before and fixed them. But 2, we've seen it done in almost every other city in America. And Baltimore has more natural resources. And when I say natural resources, I mean the port, Amtrak, 95 coming through it, brilliant people and diverse, a beautiful fabric of diversity. Johns Hopkins, number one hospital in the world. I mean, there's so much potential in Baltimore that it just needs leadership from at the state, the county, and the city levels. And I say the county because Baltimore County, Howard County, Anne Arundel County, people that come into Baltimore need to be part of that, of the solution as well.
Montgomery County, you got 4 candidates splitting up Montgomery County. You, Francho, John King, John Perez. How do you get Montgomery County?
Well, I mean, some of them have, John, they're all wonderful people, all that. But, John moved down from New York a few years ago, he happens to live in Montgomery County now. Tom has been sort of national and doing the DNC stuff and all that. And Peter does live in Tacoma Park, but I don't know that people vote that way. I think people vote for the person. I mean, Montgomery County is also going to have around 23% of the Democratic primary vote. There's going to be a $10 to $14 million county executive race that's going on there as well. And I think people know me there. I have 71% name recognition in Montgomery County with 9% negatives. People believed in what we did when I was state's attorney there and then as attorney general. And so, we're optimistic that we're going to have a big positive voter turnout in Montgomery County for our campaign, but we're all over the state. I mean, I was in Frederick last week, for example, and Ron Young, who's a senator there and was the mayor, and he has endorsed my campaign, and he said, I the other day, and I was at his wife's, who's running for his seat event, and he said, I'm endorsing Doug because he's got a long record of accomplishment that other people in the race don't have. He's the most qualified person in the race. He's a good guy or whatever. But the biggest reason why I'm endorsing him is I want to win. We need to win. We need somebody that can actually win this race. Someone that, in places like Western Maryland, the other folks on the ballot don't have to run away from the candidate because our nominee has never been in public office before, or has raised a lot of money and sort of showers the television screens with ads. They want people that have actually rolled up their sleeves and done the work. So Montgomery County, I went to Chevy Chase Elementary. That's where I'm from, and the count, and been the season ticket holder for the Orioles. It started in 1989, and so this is my city. Baltimore's what really drives me. I'm from Montgomery County. This is my state. We've got the coolest flag in the country, and I can't wait to be the governor for that state.
Who's been the best governor thus far?
Best governor? I'm going to say in my lifetime, I would have to say Paris Glendenning. And I say that, William Donald Schaefer did, I think was the best mayor for Baltimore and what he did. But I think Glendenning, and I say that because he was ahead of his time on a lot of the social issues that are around us today, and in particular the environmental issues, and starting the whole the climate change debate. So I would have to say I would say that would be who I would think. But a lot of them, Governor O'Malley did some very good things. Obviously Schaefer did, and then before Schaefer, I'm old but not that old, so I don't remember before that.
Come on in, Neil. You're muted. You're muted, Neil.
See, he's trying to.
I am muted. I violated.
You're a leader, Donnie.
Sorry about that. So what I was saying was I want to go back. You mentioned Governor O'Malley, and obviously we talked about the 2 more recent Republican governors that bookend the O'Malley administration. What is it? I'm not asking you to be critical of Governor O'Malley as a person, but was there something specific you think about his administration that led to a 2-term Hogan administration? And what about the O'Malley administration would you look to continue or do differently?
Well, I mean, look, he did a lot of great things, and he's a Democrat, and there was a lot of good bills that were passed during his time. I think what hurt him was that there was a perception, real or not, that his administration raised taxes, something 40 some odd taxes that the Hogan administration picked up on and ran with. And I think that hurt his lieutenant governor, Anthony Brown, when he ran. So I think, people are strapped right now. People do not want higher taxes right now coming out of COVID. And so I think, the Republicans have done a good job. I mean, one of the reasons why Governor Hogan is so popular, I think, is because he's candid. And people perceive him to be candid and honest and open with the public, whether he is or not. Different people would have a different view, but I think that has led a lot to his success in terms of popularity. I mean, he's enormously popular in the state of Maryland, and so I think, look, we're in a very, very different time, in a very, very different place than when any of these governors were governor. And that's, one of the urgencies for my campaign, which is that I'm the only person that's done this. I'm the only person that's held statewide executive office. The one I'm running against the tax collector, and he's done tax collecting, but we had all 56 branches of government. We had our lawyers working for them, and I was involved in policy and legal issues for the entire government. So, I think people really want a governor who's tried and true and has led and has those progressive but practical values to take us out of COVID and rebuild our economy and make sure we bridge the disparities in public health that we saw, to fight climate change and the environment, to have criminal justice reform, and make sure that we think the way we police in this country, we need to have more innovative police techniques. We need to be more imaginative, but we also need to make sure people are safe and to protect women's reproductive rights. So I think these are issues that people are going to ultimately vote on. Right now, there's a lot of people kicking the tires. There's a lot of people in the race. There's a lot of new sort of shiny pennies. Oh, what about this person? What about that person? I just met this person. They'd be great. It's like, really? They've never, been the state senator. We talked about Barack Obama, and everybody wants to be the next Barack Obama. A bunch of people in the race probably want to, use this as a stepping stone to be president. But, Barack Obama, he was a community organizer. In his community, he was an organizer. Then he was a state senator. Then he ran for Congress. Then he was a United States senator. He didn't just sort of wake up and think, hey, this would be a great starter job. I think I'll go do this. And people see through that ultimately.
Can I drill down on COVID for a second? Because you talked, obviously, that's one of the biggest issues facing anybody who takes office. And we talk, and, we've heard at both the state and the national level this idea of we're going to beat COVID, and, little to next to no discussion as to how. How do you address, because it seems to me the biggest issue right now with regard to defeating COVID, if we can use that term, is somehow beating through this vaccine skepticism. Because without that, right, the virus just continues to be out there. It morphs. We have different strains. Eventually, we get strains that are more infectious, some that may even require additional vaccines. And until we get there, really, it seems to me that there's a very limited amount that politicians and elected officials can do to quote unquote beat COVID. Do you have a specific plan for that? And what are your thoughts in terms of how we get past this public health crisis?
Well, my thought is that by the time I take office in January of 2023, COVID will be a distant memory. But in terms of what I would do now, I have zero sympathy for anyone who does not get a vaccination. Look, if you want to die, that's on you, but it's selfish to not get a vaccination to other people you don't know that don't deserve to die. And so I don't understand it. I don't understand this, why anybody would not get a vaccination. We require our kids to have vaccinations to go to schools. People that say, well, I'm not, you can't work here if you don't have a vaccination. I think you shouldn't work. If you don't have vaccination, you shouldn't work there because your judgment is deeply impaired in not going to get a vaccination. The next thing I'm doing after this show this morning is I'm getting my flu shot. We live in a time when we have medicine that protects and saves lives. People get cancer now, and it's not necessarily a death sentence, a lot. And, and when you have the ability to get a vaccination that will save your life and others, I don't understand the other side of the equation. Now, do we go overboard on some of the precautions? I mean, we're still doing this thing where you can't, make sure you wipe down stuff before you touch it. I mean, nobody on the planet has gotten COVID from touching something after somebody else has. It's an airborne disease. So some of the problems, we have a lot of misinformation that people are still latched onto. But one piece of misinformation that we know is true, that if you don't get a vaccination, then that's okay, is just crazy. So that's where I come down on that piece.
We're getting pushback from the police.
In terms of what?
Not
Them
wanting
getting
to take
vaccinated?
the vaccine.
Right.
Anti-vaxxers right here in Baltimore.
And that's why we have problems, with the police, and, one of the things I want to do as part of my police reform is to make sure that every police officer in Maryland has 2 years of education after high school. I think the idea of giving somebody a gun and a badge right when they graduate from high school is a bad idea. Montgomery County, the police, you don't hear about a lot of this stuff in Montgomery County ever. And some part of that is because they either have an associate's degree from a community college on public safety, they get diversity training, cultural training, or what have you, or they go to 2 years of school. The judgment of somebody who's just out of high school is clearly impaired. If a police officer doesn't want to get a vaccination, to me, that defies the oath they took to protect the community and the safety of the community. So I have no sympathy for that.
I agree. There are a lot of people who say that college isn't for everyone. I really disagree. I think everybody needs to go, especially given the state of our schools.
No, I agree with that, Donnie. And, our community colleges around the state, can be built up. I mean, I mention some of the boards I've been doing, some of the community work I've been doing. And, Year Up is a nonprofit. Actually, President Obama went 3 times when there was workforce development. I helped them get set up in Baltimore City, work with BCCC, in their getting people trained and educated. So even community colleges can be strengthened and should be strengthened here in Maryland. And even that 2-year degree is sort of almost a prerequisite now for getting a job. That said, though, I remember when I was coming up, there were vocational schools. I remember we played the Bell Vocats in football when I was a kid. I was like, what is that? Well, Vocats, that's short for vocational school. And people say, well, those are bad because they pigeonholed African-American students for the most part at an early age and tracked them away from being able to go to a college and going to get a vocational training. I understand that and recognize that. But at the high school level, there are kids that just don't want to go to college. And we need to provide access to vocational training for those students. So if they want to, be an HVAC guy, make six figures, or just going to be a plumber, or whatever they want to do, there ought to be vocational training available in the high schools for those students. So along with literacy training and some of the things that schools have been reluctant to add to the curriculum. And we ought to work with the teachers unions to get those placed into schools and to work, and with regular unions that can do apprenticeship programs into the high school so we can get some training. But should every child have access to the opportunity to attend a 4-year school or a 2-year school? Absolutely.
Running mate, any ideas?
You available?
Sure. What's the job?
I guess that makes me the first one to hear.
Yeah, exactly.
Are you looking at the Baltimore area? Because Rashawn chose Montgomery County running mate. Francho says that was way over my head. I don't know what that means. Does Baltimore fit into the equation?
Of course, Baltimore fits into the equation. I mean, look, there's we have to have our lieutenant governor picked by end of February. and there's some great candidates for that in the Baltimore area, in the Prince George's area, in Montgomery County, though that would that'd be a little Clinton Gore-ish, but there are some great candidates around. And for me, I view the lieutenant governor position not as sort of a ceremonial position, but as a partner. So I want to make sure that I get somebody on my ticket that can lead and wants to lead, and maybe with an emphasis on a particular area. Maybe it's public health, maybe it's education, maybe it's jobs, housing, whatever it is. But to have somebody that has that kind of the requisite experience, if I pick somebody that's really qualified, that maybe doesn't help me as much to win the race, so be it. But I want to pick somebody that is qualified to be lieutenant governor, ultimately governor of our state. I get lobbied by people all the time. What about this person? What about that person? And there's some great ideas out there, and some great thoughts. I mean, the one of the issues that folks are having is, and I know some of the candidates have asked 3 or 4 people already, and they've said no. Is that it's unclear. Not everybody knows that I'm going to win the primary, and because it's such a big Republican year, not everyone knows that I'd even win the general, or any of the other Democrats would win the general election. So it's a little bit more difficult to get somebody who has to give up their seat to be lieutenant governor. So Rashern did get Nancy Navarro. It's a great pick. She's done great things in Montgomery County on the council. But she term limit out, so she's she's not giving up her seat to do it. I love Rashern, by the way. I think Rashern's one of the most decent human beings I've met in politics. So I think he's a very good person, and I'm glad he's running for governor. But we'll see. But Baltimore, yes, is definitely in the equation. It was last time. It'll be this time.
Well, Thursday night at the Black Caucus Forum, he was a tad apologetic. He kept talking about people of color when the title of the event was the Black Agenda. So we're a little leery of Black people, afraid to talk about Black people when the forum says Black Agenda, not people of color. Okay.
And the Black experience, and I don't need to tell you this, but the Black experience in Maryland and the Black experience in the United States is very different than the experience of people of color. That doesn't mean that people of color have not faced prejudice. They have, and bias they have. But the notion that there ought to be thought behind the Black experience and the Black future and Black wealth and Black jobs and Black-owned businesses, they can be thought. It should be thought of as different as well. So the forum was wonderful. I've gone to now a couple of them. I think we have another one coming up. The NAACP is having one coming up in the near future as well. So yes, I'm not going to criticize Rashern for that, but I do think that we should be looking at policies that help the Black community.
We want people to talk directly to the issues, not around the issue.
Yes.
Because we talk around the issues now. Neil, you have experience from what you shared with with living in South Africa. We talked about the truth and reconciliation. Please chime in.
Yeah, and this circles back actually, I think, to what we were talking about earlier with President Obama. I think there are a lot of people in this country. You asked earlier, was his election a good thing or a bad thing? And Doug talked eloquently about the ways in which it's a good thing. Well, let me chime in and repeat something that I said yesterday about where it was a bad thing. There were a lot of people in this country who were more than happy after his election to say, see, nothing to see here, folks. Let's move on. We now live in what people like to refer to as a post-racial America, as though the election of one particular human being to the highest office in the country just whitewashed everything that came before it, and that there's no additional progress that needs to be made and nothing more that needs to be done, which I think was a terrible, terrible part, certainly not his fault, but a terrible part of the election of President Obama and his administration, because it led a lot of people to just ignore the issue and sweep it under the rug. And I think there's now this sort of tendency on the part of some people to not want to discuss it when really it needs to be discussed. And to your point, and what we talked about with the truth and reconciliation, the one thing that South Africa did really well that America has never done is really addressed square on its racial history. and dealt with it in a forthright and difficult but necessary way, right? The Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa was a very painful thing for a lot of people, but those, even for the people for whom it was painful, police officers, white police officers testifying about families that they had killed, and the surviving family members having to sit there and listen and hear those stories. It's gut-wrenching stuff, but it was necessary. Everybody sort of appreciated that you couldn't get to where you needed to go without doing that, right? You can't have a positive future if you don't address what happened in the past, and America's never done that.
Yeah, and Dr. King talked about the content of the character, and so if you look at it's sort of this governor, taking it back to sort of the governor's race, I'm hoping people do look at the content of the character and what they've done for certain communities and really gone and their lifetime record for communities as well, because I think that's important, and who's going to do the most for the Black community, for Baltimore, and for the state of Maryland. I think that's I think that's important, and I'm hoping people do look at that.
Mr. Gansler, Baltimore and Prince George's have the two worst school jurisdictions in the state. Any thoughts?
Well, it's horrible. Baltimore in particular is sort of where I saw it the most, because I was Attorney General during that time, and we need to sort of sit down, roll up our sleeves, along with the teachers union, along with parents, and figure out what it is. Why is that? What it is? And we don't pay our starters, we don't pay our teachers enough. And if you're paying low wages, you're going to get lower quality folks than you would if you paid higher wages. And so, why is that in Baltimore City and Prince George's County? It's clearly not because of the people that live there. It's because we're not, the accountability that you had talked about needs to be increased and enhanced. And people, Prince George is getting better, but there's such a long way to go. We need a governor that cares about it. Now, we have the Kerwin plan, the blueprint going forward, and that a lot of that addresses some of these issues. One of the things I've been pushing for I did last time, and I was first one this time, was for universal pre-K, and to make because by the time the students get to kindergarten, they're already behind, and we need to sort of up that to pre-K. Universal child care is something we need to make sure we also have. Women during COVID, 47% of women during COVID had to lose their jobs or change jobs because they had child care issues. And so, if you have child care issues, you're not going to be able to be with your kids and working with them. I mean, I mentored a student from Amadon Elementary School back in the day, with Matthew Shepard, when he's 11. And, I think mentoring helps. I mean, I stuck with him for years and years and years. And we need to make sure that people have positive role models around them. And so there's a lot we can do on the education side from a government perspective. And it's outrageous that Prince George and Baltimore have two of the worst school systems in the state.
Come on, Neil, we got time for one more.
But let me just add one thing to that, Donnie. If you look at the governor, who's running for governor, all that, and who will be governor, I know I've harped on this, but I do think it's important, not just the experience in and to itself, which says this is somebody who cares about civil rights, this is somebody who cares about education, this is somebody who cares about students, but able to work the levers of government. That experience, that's why the experience matters. So I have the relationships with the legislators in Prince George and Baltimore and the council folks. I mean, I've known them in some cases for 20 and 30 years and worked with them. And so I know how to, and on the federal side, I mean, Joe Biden's son, Bo Biden, who passed, was my best friend among the attorneys general when we were elected together. He from Delaware, me from Maryland. I served with Kamala Harris for 4 years when she was attorney general and I was attorney general. Having those relationships helps. I mean, it all matters. How to work the levers of government matters. And so I think when you look at sort of figuring out how to help the schools, you get the right people in the room and you have at it. You roll up your sleeves and have at it.
Yeah, and Donnie, you said one more thing. Let me just, I think one of the biggest problems facing us politically, locally, nationally, you name it, is social media and the fact that now we have this entirely new class of politicians who have no interest in legislating. And no interest in engaging in the actual process. All they care about is their sound bites on Twitter and then running off to the news channels and getting their sound bites so they can then promote it and raise money. And I think there's a lot to be said for anybody who's willing to roll their sleeves up and actually legislate and talks policy, because I think we're going away from that, and it is doing a major disservice to us as a country.
Amen.
Okay, one last question. What did you learn the last time around that you will apply this time, campaign wise?
I mean, I just learned a lot more about myself. There's no sort of one single issue that I think affected me. I think that I learned more about myself going through it. Running for statewide office is emotionally and physically draining, and no one's going to ever outwork me. And so that's why if you look at our DougGansler.com or get our emails and sign up for emails, you'll see that I'm outworking everybody exponentially. I'm all over the state meeting with different groups and meeting with people. But I think just having gone through the experience, and the more you talk to people, the more you listen to people, whether they're from Cumberland or Leonardtown or Berlin, or right smack in the downtown Baltimore City, you learn their experiences, you hear what they're saying. I feel like I'm a little bit more, getting older happens. I'll be 59 next week. I mean, it's maturing helps too. And, I'm running against some people I think some of these guys are in their 30s and 40s. And, it's good to have been around the block a little bit. And you run for statewide office 3 times, now my 4th. You've been around the block. And so I think I've learned a lot more about myself. And then losing was also a very, I'd won for 16 years and won races that nobody thought I could win on a lot of those. And, it's very humbling and sort of creates self-reflection and self-thought. So I think it's an amorphous answer, but I think that's what I learned.
Well, I've been interviewing you for 15 years now, and I think you're a wonderful person, a wonderful man, a man of your word, and we have to bring you back on this show. Neil, any final thoughts?
No, other than to say it's a pleasure seeing Doug again, and thanks for the conversation as always. Some really great ideas, and looking forward to the primary and the governor's race.
Thanks, guys. Love you both. You guys are great, and appreciate you. I look forward to working with you down the road.
Good deal. Thank you. We'll be back tonight at 7 o'clock. Keep watching.
Thanks, everybody.
BlackUSA.News.